people would have been brought down to this area, and this dry creek would have contained water, and they were loaded into the boats and brought down to the Minas Basin, where they would have been loaded on the transports and taken away from their homeland forever. European settlers came to this place over 400 years ago. It's amongst the most fertile and beautiful farmland in all of North America. Today it's called Nova Scotia. But to the original French settlers, this place was called l'Acadie. In 1604, 16 years before the Mayflower Pilgrims landed at Plymouth Rock, French colonists came to Acadie and established one of the first permanent European communities in North America. Acadie's early years were precarious, but beginning in 1632, the first families began to arrive at the Port Royal settlement. Over the next 20 years, some 60 families came to make Acadie their home. These were the ancestors of nearly all the Acadian peoples of Canada and Louisiana today.
These people already knew each other. Somewhere around 60% or so of the people who became the Acadians came from the same neighborhood, from around a 20-mile radius around one little town in northern Poitou. They already knew each other. They already had a sense of identity, a sense of community, a sense of society. And essentially, this little society was uplifted and boated over to what we now call Nova Scotia, what they called l'Acadie, after the name that the Mi'kmaq Indians used to call the place.
The colony grew rapidly, spreading outward from Port Royal to Grand Pré, the Minas Basin, Beaubassin, and Chignecto. Small families expanded into large clans. These clans formed the base of Acadian society.
The family was so important for those people that there couldn't be a country, there couldn't be a people if there was not basically the groups of families that were all related to one another. So they kept on helping each other to survive. For instance, if one man named Cormier would die, then the Leblanc would take over the kids, but keep the name Cormier so that the descendant of that man would know where they came from.
From the early start of the 17th century, when Acadia appears on the map as a small French colony, the French inhabitants that later on would be known as Acadians really had no choice but to take care of their own affairs. France was far away. The major French settlement in the area was also far away in the St. Lawrence Valley, which is now Quebec.
The Acadians, or at least the colonists, French colonists who colonized the Bay of Fundy Basin, were refugees from the very bloody, very intense religious civil war that plagued France for almost a century, from the early to mid 1500s up until and culminating in 1628 with the fall of La Rochelle. Much of the warfare, much of the worst fighting took place in northwestern Poitou province. And the Acadians, who were peasants in that area, were caught in a military crossfire.
As generations passed, memories of the mother country began to fade. Isolated from France, the Acadians began to think of themselves as an independent people, evolving a culture and a way of life uniquely their own, developing a distinctly North American mentality.
The Acadians were the first group of European settlers in the New World to use a name for themselves that no longer had anything to do with the Old World. They were profoundly North American. They were what my colleague Mate Alain refers to as Homo Americanus, the first example, in fact, of that new species.
Work was done as a community, whether it was building their homes, harvesting crops, even holding back the encroaching seas. Through an elaborate system of dikes and sluices, les aboiteaux, the Acadians reclaimed over 13,000 acres of saltwater marsh and turned it into the richest farmland in America.
French Acadia was mostly in what is now Nova Scotia, around the Bay of Fundy. There is where you would have found the great majority of Acadian villages. And the great majority of the inhabitants of those villages were farmers. And they put together sort of a very original way to share croplands by building dikes, sort of to take from the sea a special kind of harvest. And in French, they would call these systems aboiteaux. This made them very prosperous farmers that had to work together, because at low tide they could work in the fields, but if the tides, especially the tides of the Bay and Fundy, which are one of the highest in the world, when the big tides would come in, they would have to fight the tides away by building these dikes.
But it was not just the sea that was